Hi, welcome to Healing the Trauma Within. In this session, I am talking with Tracey Forde. We are talking about imposter syndrome. Tracey is a wife, mother, entrepreneur, and fierce female. She became a mom at the tender age of 16 and walked into a life of domestic abuse unknowingly at 18 when she married her children's father. After leaving that marriage and marrying again, she realized that she needed to do some serious healing. So she walked away from what many would deem the good life: great man, beautiful home, luxury cars, good credit. It was the best decision she ever made for herself because it was the beginning of her finding, embracing, and accepting herself. Today, she's a sought after trauma healing and mindset coach, speaker, author, and businesswoman. Her passion lies in helping Black women achieve success in all areas of their lives, empowering them to live their life on their terms and be fearless, authentic, and unapologetic as they grow, thrive, and flourish. Welcome, Tracey.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And oh my gosh, we both spell our names correctly.
I know our mamas are so smart.
Yes.
Well, it's great to have you here. I totally know what imposter syndrome looks and feels like. Been there,
Mm.
done that. I have that T-shirt. But for those listening who don't know what that means, let's tell them what imposter syndrome is.
Well, imposter syndrome is it was a term that was coined by actually two female women in 1978. And basically what it is that you don't believe that you have earned, that you are worthy of the accolades, the accomplishments, everything that you have earned. You feel like you're showing up and that one day you're going to be found out that you're really an imposter.
Mhm.
Um, and that's basically what it is in a nutshell. Now, for me, I don't believe in imposter syndrome. And I have a real big issue with the two words. One, imposter criminalizes the person because most people who are imposters go to jail. Second, syndrome makes it sound like this is something that it's an illness, it's your fault, you are going to have this forever. Oh, it's so, those two words just really bother me. And the other side of that is that typically when we hear the words imposter syndrome, it's usually targeting women because men aren't taught to dumb themselves down. Men are taught to go for it and you got this and you can do this. But women, we're taught to be demure. We're taught to be humble, to
Yeah.
dim our light, even at a very, very young age. So I do understand that a lot of women feel that they are dealing with imposter syndrome, but my take on the term imposter syndrome goes much deeper than feeling like an imposter and it being a syndrome, and actually taps into um, historical trauma, the internalized social manuals and scripts that we've been taught, even generational trauma, and even workplace and corporate trauma.
I once you really started describing, what the two words or mean, it makes sense. Nobody wants to be an imposter, and they definitely don't want to have something that you suffer from. Um, but yet, I think as trauma survivors, depending on what our traumas are,
Mm,
specifically domestic abuse survivors, we are
mm,
beaten down, or emotional abuse survivors, even. We are beaten down and told that we're not worth anything, that we're nothing, we're never good enough, we'll never be good enough, we'll never amount to anything.
yes.
Um, and so that can lead to those feelings of the quote unquote imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it can. And being a survivor of domestic abuse, my abuse was different. Although in some parts of it, there were times where I did feel unworthy. He'd say things like, "You're skinnier than a rail," and because I was literally small, I was a size zero and it was too big. Anytime I went to the store, but um, I never really thought of myself. But you're right. When we are constantly told in either verbs coming out of someone's mouth or in their actions toward us,
Mhm.
we can feel as if we are not worthy. And I have to say, for me, I felt that a small part of the time, but I would always fall back on two things. One, I always knew that I was worthy. And I don't know if that was something innate inside me, but I once I became more spiritual and grew in my faith, I realized that it really was innate inside of me. That just by being in this beautiful world, I knew that I was worthy. No one could diminish that, no matter what they did to me, no matter what they said to me, no matter what they said about me. Now, everyone isn't that strong, and I
Mhm.
understand that. But if we can start to peel back the layers as to why it was, and I won't even say easy, why we started to even think that, even though we knew that the abuse was not something that one that we caused or that we deserved. And if we start to peel those layers back, we will actually start to understand that that lack of worthiness that we felt more than likely came from childhood or from even societal models. Me being a Black woman, my lack of worthiness actually was driven more so by what I saw on TV, what I saw and heard about Black people. So it was easier for me to accept that maybe I wasn't worthy from my ex-husband, my children's father, when he would say that, because back in the day, even being as small as I was, and I'm in my 50s now, I was literally straight up and down. If I had a little, I didn't have a shape. So I already was feeling a little bit insecure.
Mhm.
So hearing it from the social media, and I'm going to say social media from the TV, because back then I don't think we didn't have computers, and not like we do now. We didn't have Instagram and Facebook. But yeah, it was much easier for us to accept that. But did it start there? Did it start somewhere else? And I think when we start to peel the layers back to understand where that lack of worthiness, that lack of not enoughness, actually lack of sufficiency started, then we can separate the two and start doing healing, because we do need to heal in both of those areas, from the trauma that may have started at home, the trauma that historically that we've heard if you are a Black, Indigenous person of color, um, and also from the person that was supposed to support us and love us and lift us up and make us. And now I won't even say make us, because our worthiness is something that we have to own ourselves.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think a lot of it is intergenerational.
Mm,
I think started generations back, and it's just kind of
absolutely.
carried through.
You're so right. And I would have to say, and again, I'm going to speak from the perspective of my own lived experience.
Mhm.
My lived experience actually did it. When you say intergenerational, you are so right, but it actually started with historical, from slavery.
Mhm.
So many of us, and I'm going to say even my yourself, many of us started and had to deal with the intergenerational trauma that actually started from being captured, because many European nations and countries were captured by people that look like themselves,
Mhm.
right? So all of that trauma is compounded, and then whatever our ancestors, our great grandmother, their great grandmother, and so forth and so on, they're only able to teach what they know. And if you know the quote by Maya Angelou, and I love this one, you do better when you know better. That's all that they could teach us. So we intergenerational trauma is basically that. They were teaching us everything that they knew, whether it was good or bad, because we have to remember, back in those days, and even now, we still have to survive. Our lower brain was it working overtime for survival.
Mhm.
So what they were telling us, and I'm going to speak from being on the plantations, if we were told, and I don't know if you've ever seen Roots or Underground Real, one of those things. If you've ever seen a mother in the field picking cotton, and she's got her younger child, and you'll see the plantation supervisor, whatever, and he starts to look at the young child, whether it's a male or female, and he may say, "Oh my goodness, he's getting big. We're going to be able to put him in the fields," or she's rounding out, or something like that. And if you ever hear the mother or whomever that person was, that caretaker, would always dumb that child down, that was survival. But what we didn't understand was that that child actually heard it also.
Mm-hmm.
So the child internalized that and thought, "Oh, I'm dumb. I'm good for nothing. I don't," because those are the types of words that the mother or the caretaker would use to protect that child and minimize that when that child would be put into the field to pick cotton, or put in the slave owner's home
Mm-hmm.
to take care of it. So all of those things, you've lived those things, and those things continue to be passed down. I know in my family, growing up, sometimes we heard things like, "You're not going to be, you ain't good for nothing." Now, they didn't necessarily mean you ain't good for nothing for your everything. Maybe it was in that particular moment that you just weren't good for nothing because you just could not get it right for whatever reason. They felt like you weren't doing it fast enough. And those types of sayings came from their ancestors, and they're still saying them. So that intergenerational trauma has a foothold. But then tap that intergenerational trauma onto the intergenerational trauma of the person that's doing the abusing.
Mm-hmm.
Double whammy. So it's so easy for us to feel that imposter syndrome because, hey, if I've been told that I'm not going to be anything, I'm not good for anything. So how in the Hammond Brown Jennings did I get these degrees? Obviously, I can read a book and study and get a degree. That's it. I can do that. But did I really do that? Especially when I'm not going to be good for anything, or you are never going to amount to anything, or you are not worth the sole on my shoe, and you've heard these things. So it's so hard to get those things out of our mind, and that's why it's so important for us to manage our thoughts, because if we can manage our thoughts, then we can manage the emotions. And when we're managing our emotions, it opens up our emotional capacity to actually access the truth of who we are, so that we can expand our joy, our peace, our worthiness, our agency, our self-sufficiency, and our sufficiency.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Managing our thoughts is key to changing that pattern, stopping it in its tracks and changing it, going forward, so that number one, we change the way we feel about ourselves, but number two, we're not putting that on our family, on our children
Mhm.
and their children. And so we've got to stop it somewhere.
Yes, we got to be the generational cycle breakers. I don't say generational curses because we aren't cursed. These are just cycles that
Mm-mm.
until someone gets the courage, because you have to have the courage before you can have the confidence to say no more.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, if, as a survivor of domestic violence, I had to get the courage to say, "I'm leaving this." I didn't have the confidence, but I had to have the courage to say, "You know what? No more." And that's the same thing with generational cycle breakers. We've got to say, "You know what, Mom, it's not okay for you to talk to me like that anymore. Dad, it's not okay for you to talk to me like that anymore." And I am willing to say, I'm going to set some solid boundaries that if you disrespect me this way, or if you say these things to me, I am going to say, "We can't talk," or "I'm going to get off the phone." And my dad was very, very, sometimes verbally abusive. He was a survivor of Vietnam, and he came back a totally different person. And so whenever he would get into his moments, I would never disrespect him, but I would always tell my mom, "You know what, Mom, I love you, but we got to go."
Yep.
So I would remove myself. That was my boundary. My boundary was one, I'm not going to disrespect him because one, I know that part of who he is today is not something that this wasn't him before he went to Vietnam. He's a changed man. But two, I'm not going to allow him to make me be someone that I know is not who I'm supposed to be. And removing myself actually diminish the outburst that my mother would end up dealing with after we left, more than likely. So it wasn't just for my own protection; it was for theirs as well. But we broke that generational cycle, and my daughters are now also generational cycle breakers. Thank God.
So for those who are listening to us, and trying to figure out, okay, how do we how do we manage our thoughts? How do we get out of this feeling of less than, not worthy, whatever we want to call imposter syndrome? How do we do it?
Oh, here's the biggest thing is first we need to recognize where it's coming from. The only way that you can recognize where it's coming from is to start being mindful of your thoughts. And being mindful is simply being intentional and deliberate about what you are allowing into your mind and what is going through your mind. For instance, a lot of people say that meditation is tough for them. Well, it's not that you need to silence your mind. You just need to be aware that the thoughts are there and just let them float through. When you're being intentional and mindful of them so that you can capture the thoughts, that's when you're saying, okay, oh, wow, I just had that thought that said, let's say the word is, I'm not capable. Well, then when you recognize that you've had that thought, then you have to remind yourself. And I always tell my clients, keep a proof book, if you would call it, your receipt book. Okay, look, where's that diploma? Where's that report card? Was I on the dean's list? Oh, yes, snap. Yes, I was on the dean's list. I did that. I did that. What did you do that was hard? Because getting through 4 years of college, and if you're like me, it took me five because I did it part time. But getting through those 4 or 5 years of college to earn that degree took something that other people don't have. That's your receipt, sis. So when your mind, you're capturing that thought and you find yourself thinking that, you can pull out your receipt book and then pat yourself up on the back and say, you know what? Oh yeah, I did that. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is take a look at receipts could be your most of us, if you're working in corporate America, there are performance reviews.
Mhm.
Take a look at those performance reviews. What are those performance reviews saying about you? Not only that, look at the promotions that you have garnered. You didn't just get those promotions. You actually showed up and did the work. If you don't do the work, you don't get the promotions. How many people have you known that just get promotions for the sake of getting promotions?
None.
So there is your proof there as well. Another thing that I always encourage my clients to do, and the biggest thing is to really start to peel back those layers. And this is the most important part of actually catching your thoughts and being mindful is working with someone to help you to uncover what the true root is. Is it because if it's workplace trauma, that is so deeply rooted in, I don't get like to use this word, but white supremacy. I prefer white inferiority complex. But if you think about it, when you go into the workplace, there are certain, again, internalized social scripts and manuals that we are supposed to live by that box us into what professionalism is supposed to look like, what right and wrong is, how we're supposed to dress, how we're supposed to talk, how we're supposed to show up. If you are a female, there's toxic masculinity that's typically always in the workplace and even in the business world if you're an entrepreneur. So when you're thinking about that, you have to remember those things were actually driven by colonialization, patriarchy. So when you start to think about, oh my God, I'm feeling less than, or I'm feeling like I'm, start to remember where you are and the true reason why you are feeling those ways. And those have nothing to do with you as a person, but mostly to do with the historical trauma, the social norms, the ideas of white supremacy and patriarchy and so forth. And when you can start to pull back those layers and start to choose you and step into your own power, then that feeling of being an imposter starts to lose its power over you, because now you have uncovered the truth of who you are, and also the truth of the systems and the manuals that really are not meant for any of us. Boxing us in is not the way we're supposed to be. Life is a cycle, which is circular. Those boxes came because they are controlling. So if you are feeling less than, remember it's all about, that's exactly the way they want you to feel, because if you feel less than, guess what? You produce more. The other side of it, and I don't want to take too much time, but perfectionism. Many of us who have imposter syndrome or believe we have imposter syndrome, we're actually suffering with perfectionism a
Mhm.
lot of times also. Let's think about perfectionism. Perfectionism is deeply rooted in capitalism, because if you are constantly striving to be perfect and to be the best at everything, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be constantly taking courses. You're going to be constantly trying to get degrees. You're going to constantly be doing everything to up level yourself, which in those instances means you're going to be constantly spending money, which means you're going to be funding capitalism. How do you minimize that? You have to remember that you are doing the best that you can with what you can, and there is no such thing as perfection. That is an illusion. And you will be striving for the rest of your life to get to something that you will never ever achieve, which means you will be missing out on peace, joy, fun, even just enjoying your own successes. Because you can't enjoy your success if you think that it was never perfect enough, it was never good enough.
Very
Is it
true.
going to be easy? It will not be easy, because it is something we've been conditioned to do, right? But with practice, and I'm going to say it, not practice, but with mindful, intentional, and deliberate practice, it will become easier and easier. And it may never go away, but when it does pop up, you will recognize it for what it is. And you will tell your little ego, your little Tracy, or your little Camila, your little Susan, because that's exactly what it is. It's our brain doing exactly what it's supposed to do to help us survive in this world. We've been conditioned. But then in those times, we just give it some love, and we're reminded that, you know what? I got this. And I do appreciate you, but I got this. I'm all good. We're good.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on and
And
talking with me today. This has been fantastic.
thank you so much. I had a blast.
Listeners, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you in one of the next sessions.